Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this video where I'm going to be going over 5 different JavaScript concepts that I think are really important for beginner to intermediate JavaScript developers, which I think are usually overlooked by many, not in the sense that they just don't learn it, but in the sense that many developers who are starting out in the journey, they kind of get scared of learning this concept, so they kind of just have an idea of how they work, but don't actually use them a lot, or don't actually really understand how to work with them. So I'm gonna go over those 5 concepts, which I really think are gonna be beneficial for some of you guys which are studying JavaScript. And before we get into the video, I wanted to thank you guys, because today in a few hours we're gonna hit 10k subs, which has been like a goal of mine for since I started this channel about a year ago, and like I can't even believe that this is happening. I'm really thankful and grateful that you guys are able to support me. So I really wanted to thank you guys. I don't even know what to say. So let's get into the tutorial. Okay guys, so the first thing that I want to talk about is actually pretty simple, and I'm going to start with simpler concepts and go a little bit further with more complicated concepts. However, the first one that I want to talk about is how to distinguish between when to use the let, const, and var keywords. So I know a lot of you guys are confused about this because you guys talk about it in my comment section, but it is something that a lot of people get confused because it's just we don't see that much in other languages, right? Many languages just have 1 or 2 different keywords for declaring variables, either just a keyword for declaring a constant or for declaring another type of variable. However, with JavaScript there's 3. There's let, const, and var, and I want to go over what each of them mean and exactly when to use them. So let's imagine we have here a function, right? I'm going to create a function called say hello, and it's going to be a very simple function which literally just has some variables inside of it, and it console logs hello. So what happens is, if I created a variable here called var name, right, and I set it equal to Pedro, then this right here would exist inside of this function. And obviously, like, I created this inside of this function, it wouldn't exist outside of this. If I came over here and said console log name, it wouldn't work. But if I console logged name over here, it would, and it would. I'll just show you guys what I mean by this. I'll come over here and I'll just run my JavaScript, and you'll see that there was some errors because it says name is not defined. And I also came here at the bottom and called the function say hello. You'll see that if I ran this, ran my JavaScript, it console logged Pedro for the function first, so it worked, but for the outside it didn't. It said that name is not defined because var, the variable declared by var, only exists inside of this function, and it makes sense. Same thing will happen if we used let. However, there's a big difference between them, which is if inside of this say hello function I had an if statement, right? An if statement saying something like if I don't know, let me create a different variable here called age and set it equal to 13, and I'm just going to ask if age is equal to 13, then I want to declare this variable called name and console log it. So what would happen is this over here would exist in the whole function, because a var is a function scoped keyword, right? So it would work through the whole function, and this console log would work perfectly. So if I came over here and said say hello, and I run this, it should work. It says Pedro. Now if I change this and I just use let instead of name, you'll see that now this doesn't work. It breaks, because what happens is let is a block scoped keyword. It will only exist inside of whatever curly braces you put it inside. So technically the closest block to where we declare this variable is the if statement, which has curly braces. So it will only exist inside of the if statement. Whilst if I declare a var variable, it will exist inside of whichever function, or whichever, like, even if you declare it outside of a function, it will be globally, but it will be whichever function you created inside of. Right? Just a very simple difference as well, which it's quite overlooked. It's just that if you want to create a variable called name here and set it equal to Pedro, you can, if you're using var, come here and say name is equal to I don't know, Jake, you can change it, you can redeclare it. Whilst if you're using let, you can't. You just can't do this because it won't work. If you want to change the name to Jake, you just change the variable like this. So this is the main differences between var and let. I usually recommend whenever you're creating a variable and you want to change it later on, keep using the let, because what happens is it prevents bugs. You know exactly where your variables are going to be used. It is only accessed by those who by those functions which the variable is actually being used. So I recommend using let just for that reason. And finally, there's the const keyword, which is just in the sense that you create a variable that will never change. So if I create Pedro over here for name, I can never come over here and say name equals to Jake, because, well, this is a constant. A constant never changes. And I like using constants a lot. If you watch my videos, we use it a lot in React. But this is kind of the idea. The only minor thing is this won't change for variables like this. For example, if I came over here and I said console.log name, you'll see it will probably break. Yeah, it breaks because obviously assignment to a constant variable, you can't. However, if this wasn't a string, if this was an object like this, and it had something like, I don't know, let me actually not call this name because it doesn't make sense. I'll call this person. So it's an object containing person, and over here there's a property called name, and I added Pedro. So this is the only thing that exists in this object. If I came over here and console log person, you'll see that it works, right, perfectly. I'll just run this again. You'll see it says Pedro. Now I can mutate this object. I can't change it, but I can add new fields to this object despite it being a constant. If I came over here and said person dot, I don't know, let me add an age. So I'm just adding an age to this, which is equal to 13, and I console log person, you'll see that now the object contains age. So you can, with constant, this is this minor difference, which you can mutate an object, but you can't actually redefine the object. So these are the main differences between the let, var, and const keywords, and I don't know if it took me too long to go over this first one, but this is the first concept that we had to go over. Now I want to talk a bit about destructuring, and more specifically, I'm going to go over the concept of destructuring an object, which I find really interesting, and I use it a lot in my projects. So what happens is, if you have an object, and I'll create that example again, I'll create an object called person, and this object contains properties like name, Pedro, for example, age, which is equal to 13, and I'll just add something like email, which is equal to my email at gmail.com, something like this, right? It's just an object. Well, if I want to console log, for example, the name, I can say console log person.name, and it works, right? If I come down here at the bottom and I run this, it will say Pedro. It works perfectly. If I want to change it and in console log the age, it will work perfectly, right? Now, sometimes you might want to create variables that represent this property. So I could come over here and say something like const name is equal to person.name. So I don't need to access the object person whenever I want to console log or do something with the name property. I can just come over here and say name, and it should work. It says Pedro. Well, instead, if I want to grab every single property inside of this object, I don't necessarily need to come over here and just do it for each key, right? I don't need to do name, then age, and create a different variable like this. This would be very annoying. And then change this like to age and this to email, right? This would be very annoying. Well, what I can do is I can actually just come over here and destructure from this person object. So just set person, and this is the syntax. You open and close curly braces, and over here you just put the name of each key in the object. So I'll put name over here. I'll grab age, and I'll grab email. And now I very easily and fast with just one line of code can access the three properties inside of this object. And I created three different variables for it. So I can just say name, and if I run this, you'll see that it works perfectly. And there's some other cool stuff you can do as well. For example, if I want to add a new property to this object, I can do it by just coming over here and saying person dot, let's just add something like username equals to, I don't know, PedroTech. Right, and this is fine. If I console log this, it will show. Oh, I'm saying name. I should console log person. It will show that I'm actually correctly console logging everything. I'll just clear this up and show you guys. Now it has username. But imagine if I want to add many different properties to this object. I would have to manually add them like this, right? Which would be annoying. Now what you can do is you can just grab the object person, set it equal to another object, and this structure, like grab whatever was in person before and just add the new properties like this in one single line of code. I can add a username, which is going to be equal to PedroTech. I can add, I don't know, my country, which I'm from Brazil, so I'll just come over here and say Brazil. So you can this is just so that you can maintain your code very organized. And since we're actually altering, since we're assigning something right now, we're technically mutating, but like in the sense that we're just adding some new elements to the object. However, at the same time, we're assigning it to a different object. This is a copy of the old object. So we can't use const for this anymore. We have to use either let or var. So I'll use let, and you'll see that if I save this right now, I open this up and run it again, it now has the two new properties, which were very easily done by just adding one line of code. Now let's go over the third concept, which is iterating through arrays. And that's very, like, I know a lot of you guys probably already know that this is a very common thing that a lot of beginners have to deal with, which is especially those who come from different language backgrounds. So some people who've coded in Java or C or something like that, they're probably used to writing a for loop when they have an array. Like, let me just create an array. I'll call it numbers, and let's just add 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So they're probably used to, if I want to console log each element in this array, they'll probably do something like for let I equal 0, then I is less than numbers.length, then they just say I++, and they loop through each element, and if they want to console log it, they'll just say numbers I, right? That makes sense. They're just console logging each element in the array. They're iterating like this. And if I come over here and I clear this up and run again, you'll see that we see 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's just looping through the array and console logging each number. Now, I know that this looks okay, but JavaScript introduced in its newer versions different methods which allow you to very easily do this without having to create a variable called I, that kind of thing. This actually looks pretty ugly when you compare it to the to how you can do it with other JavaScript functions. An example is, for this specific example, I can just come over here and use the for each function, which easily will allow you to write your code a lot prettier, right? You can just run through, you can say for each and then call a function inside of it, and inside of this function, as an argument, you can grab an element. So an element is just a variable representing each element as you iterate through the array. So when you loop through the first element will be 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So what you can do is you can just console log like this, console.log the element itself. And both ways will work. If I run this, you'll see it will appear twice, as you can see. But like you can clearly see, like this code looks a lot uglier than this one right here. And this isn't just for console logging stuff. It isn't just for using the for each function. Let's have an example. For example, if I wanted to console log, if I want to actually loop through this array, and for each element in this array, I want to multiply its value by 2. So I want to change my numbers array to an array with 2, 4, 6, and 8, right? Just multiply each element by 2. I can do it with this for loop by saying numbers I equal to numbers I times 2. And then down here at the bottom, I'll just console log numbers, and you guys will see that now, instead of being 1, 2, 3, 4, it should be 2, 4, 6, 8. If I come over here and show this, you'll see it works perfectly, right? And it's okay. I'm just looping through each element and setting its value to whatever it was before times 2. But you can use a pre-built function in JavaScript called the map function, which, like, it's very complicated in the beginning, but it definitely helps if you learn it in the long run. You just grab the array numbers and say .map. And similar to the for each function, you need to build an anonymous function inside of it, which grabs an element. And this element, again, just represents each element as it iterates through the array. So now inside of here, what you have to do is you just have to return what you want each value to be different. So, for example, the map function is used to change the values inside of the array. So if I want to change each value to itself times 2, I can literally just say I want to return element times 2. So you always return whatever you want to change it to. This over here has the same effect as this over here, because we're just mapping through every element and just changing its value to its value times 2, right? So it looks a lot better, and I definitely recommend using this pre-built functions. There's also the filter function, which I'm not going to explain because this is just an overview, but there's the filter function, there's the reduce function, there's many different functions which you can use and are very helpful if you actually get the time, use the time to learn it. Now the fourth concept that I think is really important is data structures. Now this might cause some PTSD to a lot of people, but data structures is actually something that is extremely important in programming overall. If you want to get a job, you definitely need to pass some sort of data structure and algorithm interview, and it's something that not many people use JavaScript. I don't see many people using JavaScript for interviews. However, even if you're not going to use JavaScript for interviews, it is really important to learn the different data structures you can create in JavaScript. And the reason for that is because they're made for a reason. They're not just for interview questions, despite the fact that you might not use them as often. You might need to encounter them sometime, and it's also good because it will build your skill set. I'm not going to go over every single one of them. I'll just list some data structures that I think are really important to learn in JavaScript. The most basic one would be arrays, right? You know that creating an array is just saying something like this, right? Just creating an array, knowing how to work with it. Then if you want to create a hash map, or in Python it's called a dictionary, or in JavaScript it's called an object, you can just create something like, as we've done before, person, and just set it like this. This one is really important. Then there's others as well. You can create sets by saying something like, I don't know, hash set equal to new set, which is a class that comes with JavaScript, and you can do whatever you want with them. They're very useful in their own instances, but you need to, I would recommend going over on how to actually create different data structures in JavaScript and how to actually use them. There are many others which are not pre-built, obviously, if you want to create a tree or a binary tree, you can do that. If you want to create a linked list, you can do that. I think it will definitely help you understand more of the language if you try to build those data structures on your own. However, overall, I think that learning data structures is a very important concept, even if you're not interviewing or if you're not using this language specifically for your interviews. The last concept that I wanted to go over is the use of promises. Now, this is probably well known, however, understanding it pretty well is very important as well. And the thing is, with promises, you will usually not be creating your own promises, but you will be using them a lot when you're using different libraries, especially when you're trying to work with APIs. Actually, that's the main use of them, especially when you're trying to deal with some sort of application which you need to wait for some event to happen, like fetching some data or something like that. You're going to need to know how to work with promises, how to catch errors, how to do all the kind of stuff while you're trying to wait for data to be returned. So an example of that is, imagine if you're trying to fetch some data. So I'm actually going to create a fake promise over here. Let's call it fetch data. Imagine that this will allow you to fetch data, right? It will allow you to get some data from an API or something like that. So I'm just going to come here and say new promise, and this is it, right? I'm not going to write any code inside of it. What happened with promises is, usually when you use some sort of library which where it allows you to make API requests, it usually returns a promise. Why? Because you want to be able to wait for the data to be done. Like when you request some sort of data, you don't know how long it's gonna take to arrive. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on the amount of the bandwidth of your server. If your server is fast, if your internet is fast. So it depends on all of that. So you don't know when your data is gonna come back. So how can you work with that data? How can you deal with that data without knowing if it's actually there? So with promises, that's fixed. If I call this fetch data promise, I can call there's actually three methods that exist in promises, which are very important. There's the .then method, there's the .catch method, and there's the .finally, which is less commonly used and was actually introduced later on. However, all three of them are important. What happens is if your data has been successfully fetched and you received your data, you can write a function inside of this .then, which grabs the data through some sort of argument called response. And you can create a function over here. And what happens is this function will run after your data has been received. So you can be very sure that whatever you do with the data, which exists inside of response, it's going to work because the data has been successfully received. You can do something like console log response, which works perfectly. Now, if there's some issues with the request, you catch it in the .catch, and you can run a function as well that deals with this error, and you can grab the error directly from the arguments of the function. And the finally is, as the name implies, is just something that will run no matter what happens at the end. It will run, and you can do something like it's less commonly used, but you can do something like create a function here which just console logs a message saying request finished, which means that it tried it, and no matter what happens, it will run this function at the end. This is important because, as I mentioned, whenever you're working with a JavaScript application, you're probably building something that people will be using. A lot of people will be using. And nowadays, creating applications that are responsive and are different based on the user are really important. So you'll probably be probably dealing with some sort of API. And understanding how promises works is literally essential for those who want to get better in JavaScript. So that's basically it for this video. Those are the 5 concepts that I would recommend any beginner to intermediate JavaScript developer learn and actually spend their time reviewing. So if you really enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment down below what you want to see next. I'm still posting my full stack series. I just wanted to post a video in between it because my last 14 videos have been of the series. So that's kind of the idea. I just wanted to post a video in between it. Again, I'm really thankful for 10K subs. I can't even believe I'm saying this, but that's all you guys. I'm really thankful about that. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, leave a like down below, and I see you guys next time.